I have enjoyed a lot of these podcasts where the discussions went into subjects like aliens, UFOs, life on other planets, possible life on other planets, space exploration, and things like that. Many times I wanted to jump in the discussion and share what I know or what I suspect about these things. So this is what I'm going to do here today. So first of all, a spiritual perspective can do a lot to bring much light upon any subject. By a spiritual perspective, I mean the perspective of a consciousness that can perceive or be aware, to an extent, of a relatively large scope of psychic or subtle energies of various kinds from various dimensions or planes of reality. By a spiritual perspective, I mean the perspective of a consciousness that has expanded somewhat its own power to be aware or conscious beyond mere physical, empirical, or sensory reality. In other words, the nature of consciousness is not at all limited to our physical bodies in terms of possibilities of experience and accumulation of knowledge. So from a sensory physical perspective, and this includes all of our actual technological tools, anything relating to space will involve crazy mind-numbing distances, hostile to life environments on other planets, also a seeming impossibility of contact with other civilizations from other worlds if they exist. So that's kind of the current astronomical zeitgeist summed up in a few words. But again, that's from a sensory physical perspective. It is not so from a spiritual perspective. So the existence of subtle energies like the energy we call the soul, which is another word for the nature of consciousness, the existence of planes, dimensions beyond the very small and limited reach of our senses, and current technological tools is not new knowledge at all. So there always were men and women who were more developed upon these lines and could know, see and explore way beyond what's currently considered possible. So take for example a few of the following quotes from author Elena Rorick. Her many books contain the words of her spiritual instructor. So her spiritual instructor is speaking here, okay? Quote, Uruzveti knows how difficult it is for people to accept the diversity of evolution. Each one insists that there is but one law and cherishes a different notion about cosmos. When they find contradictions in the various scriptures, they accuse them of inaccuracy. These disputes and misunderstandings arise because of the inability of the ordinary intellect to imagine a scheme with infinite possibilities and a universal law with many aspects. And the ordinary intellect here is mostly limited by believing that sensory perception is the only way to gain knowledge about the world and the cosmos. I continue. Quote, nevertheless, one should become accustomed to cosmic diversity, meaning here the infinitely unfathomable diversity of omnipresent life everywhere in the cosmos. I continue. Quote, our planet with its subtle spheres, meaning the various planes and dimensions that are part of the life of this planet as a whole, can be influenced in the most unexpected ways by the far-off worlds and civilizations. It is wrong to think that our solar system is entirely isolated. On the contrary, all the worlds are subtly interrelated. The fundamental law is immutable, but each planet creates and projects its individual characteristics. That's kind of the basis of what is called esoteric astrology. Each planet creates and projects its individual characteristics. Individuals of much older stages of evolution coexist on Earth with the people of the sixth race. And race here doesn't mean color of skin. Race in this context means quality of consciousness. And this is a complex subject for perhaps a future video. The concept of race from a spiritual perspective. So I continue, quote, one can observe that the outlook of people varies from the most primitive to the enlightened, and it has always been so. We meet with contrasts not only in the earthly realm, but also in the subtle world. It is important to know about these intrusive influences of distant systems. They act like explosions and storms and can bring a form of revolution. Therefore, do not assume that the subtle world is strictly and forever ordered. One must become accustomed to the idea that even in the higher spheres there can be collisions of psychic forces. Only an awareness of the great manifoldness can save one from the perils of limitation. One must feel oneself living in the infinite and gain strength by directing one's consciousness to the far-off worlds. In this way, the idea of the manifoldness of evolution will become clearer. And guess what? This book was published in 1938. Here's more. Some still believe that Earth is stationary, that it is the center of the universe. Of course, we know it's not the case now. But in those days, perhaps many more people believed that. So some still believe that Earth is stationary, that it is the center of the universe, and that human life exists only here. But if people continue to believe that Earth is the center of the universe, and that they are the only crown of creation, there will be a new convulsion of ignorance. Such misconceptions are absurd and harmful for evolution, and even without them, people are hopelessly unaware of infinity. Scientists should understand their responsibility and point out the danger of such conclusions. They must have sufficient integrity not to insist on unproven theories, however spectacular they may be. There are certain attitudes that should be assumed with the utmost caution. For example, self-confidence is an excellent concept, but conceit is the grave of evolution. The planet Earth should not be belittled, but her true place amidst the grandeur of the infinite should be realized. The thinker often directed people's attention to the far-off worlds. Though he fully realized the small place occupied by Earth, he would never belittle the beauty of his birthplace. The thinker here refers to one of the great spiritual teachers of the past. I am not sure which one. So as you can see, this text seems to imply that human life existing elsewhere is something obvious. To that I 100% agree. And I would add that human life exists almost everywhere in this very solar system. So if this seems absurd to many, it is because, again, we are observing our solar system and the rest of the cosmos and everything else, actually, through the limitations of our physical senses. As soon as any consciousness has gained some measure of expansion beyond sensory reality, omnipresent life in the cosmos and life, sometimes human-type life on every planet, becomes something obvious. The visible aspect of any planet or star is just one tiny dimension of the whole life that those spheres are. Even the drones that we send to explore, like the ones sent on Mars, for example, even these drones will perceive nothing but an apparently dead world because the range of perception that these drones can register is still way too small. And that small portion of reality seems hostile to what we consider to be life. I say consider to be life because in fact our concept of what life is very limited. And if we analyze it accordingly, we're not really talking about life itself, but about form. What life itself is way beyond the grasp of what the conceptual mind can know and understand. Because from a spiritual perspective, there is nothing but life, omnipresent, eternal, and infinite. There is nothing but life, in the sense that there is no such thing as dead energy. All energy, or particles of matter, of any kind, on any plane, in any dimension or world, is alive in its own way. What life itself is, where it comes from, the why of the presence or the existence of life instead of nothing, this remains the great mystery, cosmic and infinite in scale, that no one will ever solve. So it is the notion of form, not of life itself, but form that concerns us. So it is the various forms that life and therefore consciousness can potentially take in this or any other world that we can know about. And so forms of life and also forms of human lives aren't limited to the current scope of our sensory consciousness, nor are they limited to the extended sensory scope we get from our technology. The presence of humans on Mars, for example, cannot be all that much compared to what goes on here on Earth. There are no dense physical bodies like ours on Mars, simply because such bodies that are made to function on Mars must be formed with Martian matter. Not the matter that our drones can photograph, but subtle Martian matter. The reason some human souls can or must temporarily incarnate on Mars, or anywhere else in the solar system for that matter, are usually deeply esoteric and can't really be explained using our current understanding of soul evolution, soul growth, duty, and purpose, because our current era zeitgeist knows nothing about any of that anyway. Nothing. Planetary, solar, and cosmic issues and relations as far as humans are concerned, again, is deeply esoteric stuff. And so isn't knowledge that can be gained outside of some measure of soul realization, which is another word for enlightenment or expansion of consciousness. Here's a quote from the same author, somewhat related to that idea. Uruzvati knows that the duration of the stay in the subtle world, depending on conditions, can vary from a few months to thousands of years. It would be difficult to provide all the reasons, but the chief one is the free will. One may ask whether a long stay in the subtle spheres or a short one is more beneficial for the soul. Both can be of equal value. Similarly, one may ask if the soul can choose not to return to Earth at all. Truly, all is possible, but the stay in the subtle world must then be made more useful than that on Earth. Likewise, it may be asked whether the free will can lead one to the far-off realms. Certainly it can. You already know about those beings who left for other planets. So those are known things, according to this text. I continue, quote, "This achievement is extraordinary since it strengthens the mind and creates new horizons of thought. The thinker pointed out many times that he would one day go to another world and from there establish communication. Centuries would be needed for the fulfillment of this task, but nothing is impossible if one's will is directed towards the goal." So again, the spiritual instructor here referred to as the thinker is someone who lived 2,000 or so years ago, as stated somewhere else in the book. Is it the Christ? I'm not sure, but I suspect the teacher speaking here is talking about someone else. Still, I'm not sure. So, concerning going to another world. So, of course, there's no spaceship in the ordinary sense involved in what is described here, obviously. The ability to achieve something like what is described here, space travel, gradually comes with an awakened consciousness to the laws of motion in space. Now, not the motion of gross physical bodies like ours, or heavy, technologically advanced spacecraft, but the motion of subtle bodies and forms of vehicle the soul can use to do that. What is commonly known as astral projection is a mean to do that, but it is also very limited, very basic, I would say, and also potentially very illusory. Now on to our next subject. The subject of UFOs is quite fascinating. I'm not surprised it comes up on podcasts, especially on Joe Rogan's podcasts so often, because most of us feel there is less and less space for skepticism on the subject. Now, I don't know what any of these mysterious UFO sightings are. What I suspect, however, is that their apparent lack of a propulsion system, speed, and other surprising characteristics suggest that they're not from this dimension, and they can only appear here for a brief amount of time. I am not convinced that they are vehicles analogous to a spacecraft of some sort. Rather, I suspect that these sightings are actually aspects of beings projecting or incarnating in our dimension some aspect of their consciousness. Therefore, they would be using certain occult laws of sound to aggregate high grades of earthly matter through which they can briefly manifest themselves and be seen by human eyes. Why? Again, I don't pretend to know, but again, I suspect their purpose for appearing here goes beyond mere scientific space exploration. I think it might be a mistake to project our anthropomorphic point of view on them, whatever they are. I also think their purpose is likely very occult in nature, meaning that it is likely to be way beyond what our contemporary human intelligence can know and understand. On the 26th of April 2023, a very interesting man came on the Joe Rogan podcast, that is Mr. James Fox. Now, I haven't watched his documentary Moment of Contact, but on the podcast, he has mentioned some cases of such contact with aliens that are apparently very different from the cases that I just talked about. So according to Mr. Fox, it seems that aliens with actual physical bodies were encountered. He even speaks of their smell and speech. Again, I don't claim to know what these are or may be, but I suspect such creatures, if indeed they really exist, are likely in a state of enormous existential crisis or distress. Because for them to crash here on our planet while their bodies, that is the matter their bodies are made of, is from elsewhere, meaning it belongs to another planetary body somewhere, so this can perhaps suggest that they are in a sense banished or lost or stray or vagrant or something similar. So if that's the case, their connection with their original source of life has been severed, and so they can only sooner or later perish. So what this basically means is that they are on a path of destruction or self-destruction and were falling through space from a higher sphere or dimension, not necessarily traveling through space in a linear fashion like we like to imagine. Falling through space is a very dramatic thing, and is probably the result of some form of transgression against a fundamental law concerning their very being and existence in the world or dimension they come from. So I just mentioned that we imagine space exploration in a sort of linear fashion. Actual science, pop culture, and science fiction may suggest that space exploration is in such a way linear, but it is not fundamentally so, at least not from a spiritual perspective. There is a spiraling up and down aspect to the eternal motion of space, planes, dimensions, and various globes or chains of globes and realms. Evolution of all forms, consciousnesses, and lives is cyclical. For everything in nature is cyclical, and so it is cosmically speaking as well. This is indeed a very profound and complex subject, and it must be viewed, again, not from some form of linear understanding of time, but from the angle of the eternal now. On this very subject, let me read to you an excerpt from a book called A Treatise on White Magic, which is mostly about various rules for spiritual evolution, unfoldment, and expansion. The excerpt that follows is not specifically about space travel, but it fits with what I seek to convey here about space travel. Quote, "Speed in this sense has no essential relation to time, though it is hard to find another word to use in the place of speed. It relates to the world of effects as they emanate from the world of causes. It has, perhaps essentially, a relation to truth, for the truer an impulse is, and the clearer the understanding of the subjective purpose, so will the right direction and the impact of the force follow automatically." So do you see how this could somewhat explain why the movements of some UFOs is very difficult to explain using our ordinary understanding of speed, acceleration, propulsion, and the like? I continue. Perhaps speed could be more correctly translated by the words correct direction, for where there is correct direction, true orientation, exact understanding of purpose, and recognition of the type of force required, then there is an instantaneous effect. When the soul has registered the desired quality and possesses the strength of the timeless one and the persistence of the one who is from the beginning, the process of force expression and the relation between cause and effect is spontaneous and simultaneous, not sequential. This can scarcely be understood by those who have not yet the consciousness of the eternal now. But this spontaneous and simultaneous effect is the clue. So you see, there is some very mysterious terms used in this. And again, this is a small text, quite esoteric in nature, but it still conveys a sense that time, or our ordinary understanding of time and sequence, is not the key here. It's not the key to space travel. It's not the key to a lot of things that have to do with occult or esoteric knowledge and understanding of reality. And mind you, this book was published in 1934. So to conclude, there is much knowledge and wisdom that defies even the most advanced scientific understanding of our time. To those who may want to explore this further, look into Theosophy and the series of books associated with those I quoted in this video. I'll put a link in the description below for these books. If you like this content, let me know. And remember, the spiritual path can be undertaken at any time, provided you're willing to do what it takes, and the expansion of consciousness, although gradual, is, as we read here, potentially limitless. This also means that for pure consciousness, there is no fundamental limitation to space exploration and space travel.